Let me start with you, Barrister Ejimakor. I mean, it's taken 10 years after he was first arrested to get to today's verdict and sentence. What questions does that raise for you as a lawyer?
Well, the verdict, both the verdict and the sentence came as a huge surprise to me. First of all, this is a classic case of someone being convicted solely on words he had uttered from elsewhere, not even from Nigerian soil. For instance, the judge reeled out what was purported to be broadcasts made by Nnamdi Kanu from his location in the UK during the NSAS protests. And the judge relied or pivoted on that as one of the bases upon which he granted the conviction. But guess what? A lot of people died during the NSAS. A lot of them were innocent citizens. Notably, a lot were massacred at Lekki Toll Gate. And the NSAS report from Lagos State, mainly, and from Abia State, never indicted Mazi Nnamdi Kanu or any member of IPOB or anything IPOB. But you see, the judge just went too far in extrapolating that NSAS incident and blaming it solely on Mazi Nnamdi Kanu and not on any overt act, any physical act that he committed on the soil of Nigeria, but solely on speeches or broadcasts he made or utterances he might have made from his location in the UK. So that one is number one. Number two is that the judge also made references to utterances Mazi Nnamdi Kanu made in the United States as far back as 2014, before the World Igbo Congress event. That was 9 years ago. And then, just a statement that one could say was mere puffery. We need guns, we need this and all that. And then suddenly, all of a sudden, 9 years later, you said you now granted a conviction on the claim that that statement led to the death of someone in Nigeria. You see, they have thousands of IPOB or so-called IPOB, alleged IPOB members in detention, and none came forward. They never extracted any confession, which was tendered in court, linking Nnamdi Kanu's utterances of speeches or broadcasts to any actual violence or crime or act of terrorism in Nigeria. None whatsoever.
Okay.
Okay.
And well,
a colleague from DRL as well, since they publish reports on this that cover some of these issues.
Sure. So you'll see in our human rights reports where we call out human rights violations across countries around the world. In terms of Nigeria's curriculum in particular, I don't have that information right in front of me, but we're happy to report back to you on the committee.
Sure. No, that's fine. I appreciate you both, and thank you again, Mr. Chairman, for having this hearing.
Thank you for your questions and comments. We are joined by the former chairman of the Africa Subcommittee, who is now over at the Energy and Commerce Committee, James, and I want to thank him. February of 2024, he had a very important hearing on Nigeria and other advocacy throughout that time. So the floor is yours.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so much for your personal invitation, for your leadership, and for your friendship. I'm honored to be back. Psalms 96:14 asks, "Who will rise up for me against the wicked? Who will take a stand for me against evildoers?" Nigeria is facing one of the gravest religious freedom crises in the world. As the former chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee on Africa, I have visited and have seen firsthand the direness of the conditions in what is now the deadliest place on earth to be a Christian. They are targeted, displaced, and killed simply for their faith. The ancient plea, "Is there no help for the widow's son?" still echoes today. Since 2019, nearly 17,000 Christians have been killed. In the first 7 months of this year alone, hundreds more were murdered. On June 13th, during the Yellowwater massacre, more than 280 Christians were slaughtered in a single day. These are not isolated tragedies, but a sustained pattern of religiously motivated violence, often ignored or even enabled by the Nigerian government. Extremist groups like Boko Haram, Fulani militants, and ISIS West Africa attack often without any meaningful intervention from authorities. The lack of response has created an atmosphere of impunity where Christians continue to live in constant threat and fear. The United States has previously recognized this crisis. President Trump not only designated Nigeria as a country of particular concern during his first term, but redesignated it again in his second term after President Biden inexplicably removed that designation. Religious persecution is tied to political repression and weakening institutions in Nigeria. Example, the detention of Mazi Nnamdi Kanu is a clear example. In 2022, Nigeria's Court of Appeal struck down the charges against him and ordered his release. The UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention has also called for his unconditional release. Yet he remains in solitary confinement, in deteriorating health, and recently had to represent himself in court. Nigeria has signaled that the law is optional and targeting Christians is fair game. Just hours ago this morning, despite the pleas and cries of the Nigerian people and many Nigerian lawmakers, Mazi Nnamdi Kanu was convicted on all charges. For fiscal year 2025, the U.S. has requested nearly $8 billion for sub-Saharan Africa. But when Americans see political prisoners, judicial defiance, and the slaughter of Christians, they understandably ask as they meet their own struggles, why should our tax dollars support governments that refuse to protect their own people? Is our aid aiding a genocide? Nigeria is a nation of tremendous potential, but that potential is being choked out by violent persecution of its Christian population. No country can build a stable future where churches are burned, believers are killed, and communities live in fear. The United States must stay engaged, and Nigeria must change course now. Mr. Pratt, a direct question. Do you believe, in your professional assessment, that the government of Nigeria has been infiltrated by jihadists?
I do not believe that the government of Nigeria has been infiltrated by jihadists.
Okay, because when you look at the selective enforcement of the rule of law, one might question if there are any favoritism or looking the other way when groups are being specifically targeted, despite the fact, as my colleague Mr. Moore mentioned, not enforcing the rule of law with regard to weapons. My next question, how has the Nigerian government reacted since President Trump's country of particular concern designation announcement?
They have taken the designation very seriously. There is a senior delegation here now. They will meet with the most senior officials of the U.S. government this week. And we have already demarched the government in Abuja and here in Washington on the action plan. And I can say that the results so far have been positive in terms of cooperation.
The Nigerian government needs to do more to address this issue themselves, but what measures are being taken to assist Nigeria to increase its focus on persecution, particularly in the Middle Belt?
Yeah, so thank you for your question, Congressman James. As you mentioned, the Middle Belt is a particular concern. That's where Christians, you mentioned Yelwada, where 250 or 280 Christians were killed, massacred. They were targeted because they were Christians. Churches have been burned there. There have been internally displaced people there. And so we're reviewing all options at the State Department, including Chairman Smith, you mentioned in our bureau, we have Global Magnitsky Act sanctions. We have other tools at our disposal as well to make sure that Nigeria, the Nigerian government gets the message that we are serious about the persecution of Christians and other communities as well, but particularly Christians right now who are suffering disproportionately in the Middle Belt.
Thank you for your answer, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for having me again. God bless you, and good luck. I'm here for you.
Thank you so very much, Chairman James, and thank you again for your great service. I'd like to, between the ranking member and I, we're both going to ask one more question and then go to our next panel. I would like to yield mine to my good friend, Mr. Huzenga, who asked a very serious question about the IDPs in Benue, and if there's any answer.
You've just heard a message that echoes the cries of the oppressed and the resolve of the free. At Biafra Battle Cry TV, we stand firm in amplifying voices that challenge tyranny and defend humanity. Stay vigilant, stay united, and never stop speaking truth to power. Until next time, keep the fire of freedom burning.